This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're returning to what has become a perennial issue in the wake of the pandemic, and that is the scope of practice for physician assistants in New York, with Governor Kathy Hochul advancing language this year that would enable, quote, physician assistants with sufficient training to practice independently. For more on what that would look like in reality, we're joined in the studio by Kevin Bolan, a physician assistant practicing in the Adirondacks, who is legislative chair for the New York State Society of PAs. Thanks for joining us, Kevin.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So according to the memorandum accompanying the governor's proposal, if adopted, this language would allow PAs to practice independently under specific circumstances and in designated settings. So what does independently mean in a day-to-day practice, and what are those circumstances and settings where this dynamic would be allowed?
Well, first of all, no one practices independently anymore. You don't see a physician hanging a shingle and opening up a practice anymore because it's just cost prohibitive.
Sure.
We all work as part of a team. So PAs work autonomously now. This would not change our scope of practice because PAs already have unlimited scope of practice. We practice in every specialty in every county of New York and with every age group.
And so when you say unlimited scope of practice, to my ears, that means, wait, is a PA going to be doing brain surgery? What exactly does that mean then?
So a PA does assist in brain surgery.
Okay.
A PA works in a primary care setting, works in a jail, works in a hospital, works in an emergency room, works at urgent care. Many people are seeing PAs who are working autonomously, and there's no physician in the back room, going over their note or, reviewing their charts on a regular basis, because that's not a legal issue that we have. That was done away with many, many years ago.
So then how would the governor's language change the status quo?
So basically, it would just really change that tether of having a supervising physician. So like in my practice, I work in a very rural area in the Adirondacks, 20 miles from my supervising physician and 20 miles from a gas station. So if he's getting older, if he were to retire, I've been there for 35 years, and there's another PA now that's been there for 3 years, we would have to stop practicing, even though, we call him or email him or, use our electronic health records to send a message to him when we need to. But we're held to the same standard of care as a physician is. And he actually hasn't seen a patient in, the office that I work in 35 years.
So then what would be different moving forward? You wouldn't have to report to this person for any of your work?
We wouldn't need to have that we would get rid of that arbitrary barrier of having to need a supervising physician for PAs who have experience, especially in primary care regions.
And you say have experience. Is that something that's spelled out in this bill? And if so, what constitutes experience?
So in the governor's legislation, it's 8,000 hours over 4 years, and then we have bills that are coming back this year from Assemblywoman Bolan and Senator Rivera that have 6,000 hours or 3 years experience, which is the same experience as a resident would have in, say, family practice or internal medicine or pediatric residency.
Now, when you say same experience, it might be the same timeline, but is it the same experience in terms of the responsibilities and what that person is asked to do?
Yes, because remember, the scope of the standard of care is the standard of care. So if an orthopedist sets your bone and puts a cast on your arm, or a PA sets that bone and puts a cast on your arm, that's the same scope of practice. If you come into the office and I examine you and determine you have pneumonia, I'm going to prescribe an antibiotic and give you instructions on what to do for your pneumonia, just like a physician would. So really, many people have been seen by a PA, and oftentimes, they prefer to see the PA because they usually spend more time with them and educate them about their illness. But remember, we go to a very intensive 2-year program. It's an average program nationwide is 27 months, and it's very, very difficult to get into. The applicants, are just astounding. The percentage of people that get into PA school is about 20%, and it's about 23% of people who apply to medical school get in. So it's very, very competitive.
Is it competitive because there just aren't enough opportunities for physician assistants? Is that the reason why it's competitive? Are there just not enough of these schools?
I think it's mostly because the cost of graduate medical education is so high. The cost of PA education, though it's high, it's probably a third the cost of physician education. So we're taught on the medical model just like physicians are. So our first year is all academic with anatomy and physiology and coursework in pharmacology and medicine, pediatrics, surgery, orthopedics. And then our second year, we do rotations just like a medical student would in the different specialties.
So I want to come back to the scenario that you're operating under, because it sounds like you don't have any substantive oversight right now. So why should the response to that dynamic be, well, it's a meaningless oversight now, let's just get rid of all the oversight? Why shouldn't the response be, boy, I don't think this situation that Kevin's operating under makes sense. We should have more rigorous eyes on him?
Well, first of all, 10 states have already removed physicians' mandatory supervision in one way or another nationwide. So New York's actually kind of behind the eight ball now. We've been, lobbying for the last several years, trying to get this legislation passed. And actually, this is the fourth year that we're actually in the governor's budget, which is a big deal. Being in the budget, that shows how important it is to the governor that we remove this barrier.
Sure, but coming back to the initial question of why isn't the conversation about making that existing oversight more meaningful? I mean, it sounds like you think it's just superfluous and you guys don't need that safety net.
Well, I mean, there are certain areas, like you've mentioned, neurosurgery,
sure,
where, a physician has to be, a licensed physician has to be the primary physician or surgeon in the operating room. But a PA can first assist. Oftentimes, PAs who work in cardiovascular surgery, do cardiac catheterizations. They're maybe assisting the physician, harvesting the vein from the leg and then handing it to the physician to do the open heart surgery. And then the physician leaves while the PA closes up the chest. So, what a PA does is very variable, whether they're working in primary care. The way that both the bill and the governor's proposal are worded is, hospitals already have credentialing processes for physicians or for PAs. So when you get hired at a hospital to work in the emergency room, say, you apply for privileges to be able to do a lumbar puncture,
sure,
to be able to intubate a patient. Okay, so someone has to sign off to make sure that you're capable of doing those. Oftentimes you have to be watch 3, maybe be observed doing 3, and then they'll sign off saying that now you have this privilege. It's the same whether it's a physician or whether it's a PA. So those credentials are already in place, those processes for Article 28 facilities for hospitals. So the bill from Senator Rivera and Assemblywoman Bolan basically says that either a PA has to work in a hospital or an Article 28 facility or work in a primary care setting and have at least 6,000 hours. So the bill is slightly different than the governor's language of 8,000 hours.
And so then if the governor's language was adopted, what would be the limitations of it? What are the instances where you would still have to report to someone or you wouldn't be allowed to do something?
So in an Article 28 facility,
sure,
it would be those privileges. Again, it doesn't overstep the law saying that in every surgery, a duly licensed physician has to be the primary surgeon. So this is not going to replace that primary surgeon. It's going to allow. So, say a PA is working in the Department of Surgery or in the intensive care unit, and their supervising physician, maybe is a pulmonologist or a cardiologist or a hospitalist.
Okay.
But that physician takes a job somewhere else. So what if that's the only physician in that small hospital that's an intensivist or that is that hospitalist in that particular area? So do they have to close the hospital down? Do they have to close the ICU, even though this PA may have been working there for 10 years?
Couldn't they just get the sign-off from a physician who's 20 miles away like you get done?
They could, but, why should a physician? So a lot of physicians are pushing back because why should they be responsible for the care that another provider gives when they haven't seen that patient? And that PA may not have called him about that, her about that patient. So why should they be responsible? So there are physician groups or individual physicians that are in favor of removing this supervision.
Sure. So what is the consumer benefit to this? What do you see as the reason why I, as a patient, would want to give a PA this additional autonomy?
Access. It's all about access. And now when you call your primary care provider's office, and you hurt your shoulder or you have a cough, they'll say, okay, well, our next appointment is March 17th. You're like, well, no, I have a cough. My shoulder really hurts, or I really have a cough. So by allowing PAs to work, especially in those rural and medically underserved areas, without having to worry about who the supervising physician is, or if they have a supervising physician, because they have the experience, people are going to be able to be seen sooner. There may be a rural practice, a rural hospital who is looking for a physician or a PA to staff a clinic. Okay, a PA can't apply for that job if there's no physician there to supervise them. But that may be a very qualified PA who could now go and take that job that's been empty for 4 years because they can't find a physician to go and work in that area.
So when we heard from some of the opponents of this issue, specifically the Medical Society of the State of New York, one of the issues they highlighted was that PAs who are operating without the existing level of supervision that exists in New York are more likely to order tests, are more likely to prescribe opioids, and the former is going to drive up costs, and the latter, could exacerbate the existing opioid epidemic. How do you think about those concerns they've raised?
I mean, the studies that I can give you or that we have actually show just the opposite, that the care given by PAs is often equivalent to that of physicians. There's an increase in malpractice when these states that have removed
well, I'm not saying malpractice. I'm saying, are they ordering x-rays or imaging more often if they lack that supervision, maybe as a way to safeguard because they're operating with less of a safety net?
Right. They're only quoting one study called the Hattiesburg study from Mississippi.
So you know what we're talking about, okay?
And in that study, there were 4 PAs out of the 100 non-physician providers that were included in that study.
And I guess coming back to the fact that this has been a perennial issue, is it just the physicians that you're facing a roadblock with here, or are there other institutional factors here that you need to overcome in order to get this across the finish line?
No, it's just the physicians, I think, feel that only a physician has the education to oversee your care. But in reality, PAs work very autonomously, and there isn't a physician in the back room or the next building. Oftentimes, when that PA is providing the care in an urgent care or in a rural area or even an emergency room that I work at, where a PA may be the only provider in the emergency room doing a 12-hour shift, and there may be no physician, on site. So, and the hospital association, the community hospital association are all in favor of our bill. They've been in favor of it for several years. Because they realize they need to improve access. PAs also cost less to educate, and they're paid less. So it'll help the entire system by getting people access to quality care and reducing the cost of their care. And let's face it, when people delay their care, it's much more costly. When people aren't able to get to their primary care provider to have that mammogram or that colonoscopy ordered, okay, or if they're sick but they can't get in, they end up going to urgent care or to the emergency room, which is much more costly, and they wait on long lines. If you were seen by your primary care provider on a regular basis, they're able to maintain your health, and we all know that it's much better to maintain your health than treat someone once they're sick.
Well, finally, not to get you to negotiate against yourself, but what about the idea of rolling this out in a limited basis or piloting something like this to make the physicians more comfortable, to make lawmakers more comfortable? I mean, you talk about the need in rural areas in particular, so why not start with something in rural counties and see how it goes, collect data, and move forward? Obviously, states have done this, like you pointed out, elsewhere, but New York is a unique animal, so maybe what happens in one state isn't replicable here for a myriad of reasons. So is that part of the conversation at all, the idea of some sort of pilot?
Well, guess what? We had a pilot project. It was called COVID-19.
Sure, but that was pretty unique circumstances all around.
Right, but that's when our healthcare delivery system was at its worst, okay? And the executive orders that went on for almost 3 years waived the requirement to have a supervising physician for all PAs, not just experienced PAs. So even new graduates didn't have to report to someone, because what was happening was PAs that were working upstate where the operating rooms were closed, they were able to go downstate and save lives and work in the ICU. The difference about a PA versus a physician is that a physician becomes a radiologist or a pediatrician or an orthopedist. When a PA graduates, we get a very general education in medicine, and we're able to switch specialties to go where we're really needed. Okay, so the orthopedist from upstate who couldn't practice because the operating room was closed, wouldn't feel comfortable working in the ICU, but a PA who moonlights in urgent care, and we have to take our exam every 10 years on everything. So a physician in orthopedics takes their boards every 10 years on orthopedics. A neurosurgeon takes their boards every 10 years on neurosurgery. A PA boards include pediatrics, orthopedics, surgery, OBGYN, primary care. So we have to stay current because more than 50% of PAs do change specialties throughout their career.
Well, on that note, we've been speaking with Kevin Bolan. He is a physician assistant practicing in the Adirondacks, and he's the legislative chair of the New York State Society of PAs. Kevin, thank you for visiting us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
And for more Capitol Press Room content, visit capitolpressroom.org or wherever you download your favorite podcasts.